Have you ever wondered what common traits are passed down in your family? Well, in this video, I'm going to be examining pedigree charts, so if you need help in this area, keep watching. So what exactly are pedigree charts? So a pedigree chart is simply a chart or a family tree that would show the genetic history of a family. So it basically would help us to analyze inheritance patterns of certain traits within a family. So it would provide you with some kind of insight as to what traits are passed on from generation to generation. And the pedigree charts allow us to determine and predict genotypes of individuals through the generations for traits or genetic diseases. So it's really helpful in studying the genetic history to allow us to predict what may possibly happen in the future based on that genetic history. So you can see like particular patterns of inheritance throughout the generations. So you can see like what is the likelihood of a particular genetic disease being passed on through the generations. So it's very useful in that respect. So in order to interpret a pedigree chart, you first need to understand what these symbols represent. Now let's put up the key here. So we have a key showing you what the symbols represent in this example of a pedigree chart. So the first thing you need to understand is that circles represent females, squares represent males. But then you would notice that there are sometimes shaded circles and squares and unshaded circles and squares. So in this case we have it color coded. So the red represents the affected individuals, so whether they have a particular trait or the genetic disease, and then the purple represents those who are normal. So what you're seeing here, we have a pedigree chart showing 4 different generations. So in the first generation, the mother and the father are shown here, and the mother is affected and the father is normal. Now what do the lines represent? So this horizontal line here represents mating or reproduction. So it may also be considered as a marriage line, but it just generally represents that this man, this woman has reproduced, and the vertical line represents the line of descent. So that line of descent is showing you the children of the parents. So what you can see here, there are 3 children. So this is the first child, the second child, and the third child. So this horizontal line just simply represents the siblings line, so brothers and sisters. So these are 3 children, and we have 1 girl and 2 boys. So this is the second generation, and within that second generation you're seeing that one of the boys would have coupled off with someone outside of the family, obviously. So this is showing you another marriage line or coupling reproduction line here. So this individual is outside of the original family, of course. So we have reproduction between this normal male with a normal female, and then once again you're seeing the line of descent and going into the third generation. So we're seeing here that 4 children were produced, and out of these 4 children we have 3 girls and 1 boy, and there's 1 affected child, and that child is a female. So this affected female would have married off or mated with a normal male. So we're seeing the coupling line again. So then going on to the 4th generation, so the line of descent. So in this 4th generation there are 3 children produced by these parents here in the 3rd generation. So we have 2 boys who are normal and 1 girl who is affected by the particular trait or the disease that you may be studying. So that is just a general overview of the pedigree charts. So you have to understand that pedigree charts are just going to show you the phenotypes. It does not give you any information on the genotypes. So that is where you have to use your biological knowledge of genetic crosses to pretty much predict what the genotypes of the individuals in the chart would be. So it's all about analyzing the chart and predicting those genotypes. So you can observe how the phenotype patterns spread from generation to generation to generation. Okay, so before being able to interpret a pedigree chart, you need to be able to determine if the particular trait that you're studying is dominant or recessive. So in terms of autosomal dominance, so you should be familiar with these terms from previous videos. So autosomal meaning that it is related to chromosomes. These particular traits will be carried on chromosomes that are not sex chromosomes. So those are 22 chromosomes within the full genotype that would be non-sex chromosomes. So that means that the particular trait is not sex linked. And then of course dominant meaning it has the overriding or overpowering effect if it comes with recessive allele. So by looking at this portion of a pedigree chart, and we're seeing here that two of the parents are affected, both of the parents are affected. So remember, usually the shaded circles and squares represent the affected individuals or those who are carrying the particular trait. So clearly both parents are affected. But if you look at the children, there are two children. One is affected, so the male, the boy is affected, and the female is not. So it is actually impossible for both parents to have the recessive trait and then have a child that does not even have the trait. So therefore this is showing you that this particular trait would have to be dominant, because it produced one child that has the actual trait and one child that is unaffected. So this is showing you that both parents would have to be heterozygous. So this individual would have inherited the dominant alleles from the parents, making them affected, while this individual who is non-affected would have inherited two recessive alleles, so one from each parent. So that's the only way that this individual would be unaffected. So this is showing you about autosomal dominant traits that are autosomal dominant. Now, so using the letters is showing you that affected individuals must either be homozygous dominant or heterozygous. So clearly the parents would have to be heterozygous. So both parents are heterozygous, and this child can either be homozygous dominant or heterozygous. But this would be the child that would be homozygous recessive, so the unaffected child. So this particular trait is autosomal dominant. Now in terms of autosomal recessive, so it cannot, this cannot be a dominant trait because clearly the parents are not affected, but yet we're seeing that one of the two children are affected. So this is showing you that definitely cannot be a dominant trait. So in order for this individual to be affected, it would have had to inherit two recessive alleles, because this individual is like the parent. So we're assuming that this particular trait, the shaded part, remember the shaded part represents the trait. So this individual who has the trait could have only have the trait if it inherited two recessive alleles, so one from each of the parents. So this has to be an autosomal recessive trait. So the affected individual, so anyone who has a shaded circle or a shaded square, would be homozygous recessive in this particular case. So this is how you would determine if a trait is dominant or recessive. Alright, let's look at the first example I have here. So this is a pedigree chart for hair color. So we're looking at black hair versus brown hair. So clearly from the chart, well, the key, you can see that the black circles and squares represent those individuals with black hair. So this is the information given. And then the unshaded circles and squares represent those individuals with brown hair. So you need to know what alleles you're going to be working with, so you can select your letters. So here I've selected B's. So basically we're saying that black hair is the dominant trait here. And usually the dominant trait tends to be passed on a little more in the pedigree chart, but I will get to the chart shortly to explain that. So what we're going to be working with, we're using the letter B. So capital B is the dominant allele for black hair. So in order to have black hair, you have to be either homozygous dominant or heterozygous. Now in order to have brown hair, so little b, common B, would be the recessive allele for brown hair. So the only time that you would have brown hair, the only way you can have brown hair, is if you inherit both recessive alleles from both parents. So one recessive allele from the father, one recessive allele from the mother. So all brown hair individuals would be, two common Bs would be homozygous recessive. So usually the recessive trait, the individuals with the recessive trait, those tend to be the ones that can be worked out easily in the pedigree chart. So we're clear that black hair is the dominant trait here. So let's go to the pedigree chart and break this down. So what you're seeing here, the parents represented by P. We have a brown hair father and a black hair mother. Now this brown haired father and black haired mother mated and they produce 3 children. So we have a brown hair female, a black hair female, and a black hair male. So 3 children, and 2 out of those 3 children have black hair like the mother. So how do we know that this is really a dominant trait? So what you can see is, in order for this particular trait to be passed on to 2 out of the 3 children, it has to be dominant. Because remember, the dominant alleles are the ones that are going to be overpowering. So these 2 children, we know, have to be carrying the dominant allele just like the mother. So we can work out the father's genotype right away. So the father's genotype would have to be 2 little b's, and we're still trying to figure out what the mother's genotype could be. Now the fact is, there are only 2 options for black hair. We have homozygous dominant and heterozygous. So you need to do it by trial and error. So can this mother be homozygous dominant? Can she be 2 big B's? Now if she is 2 big B's, and we already established that the father has to be homozygous recessive because he has brown hair. So all of the brown hair individuals would be homozygous recessive. So you can pretty much work that out and put that into the pedigree chart right away. So all of the unshaded circles and squares, all of them would be homozygous recessive. So that's the first thing that we can work out. So all the brown haired individuals, so they would have to be all homozygous recessive in order to have brown hair. So what we really need to be working out now is all the black hair individual. So basically, using your prior knowledge of inheritance and genetic crosses, we can clearly rule out the fact that this mother cannot be homozygous dominant. If she was homozygous dominant, that means that all of her children should be black haired individuals, because she would have passed on the dominant allele to all of her children, and that is not the case. So we can basically rule that out, that the mother is homozygous dominant. So basically that only leaves the mother being heterozygous. So she has to be heterozygous in order to contribute that recessive allele to this child here, this female who is brown haired. So you would see that this female would have received the recessive allele from the father in addition to the recessive allele from her mother. So we know that the mother has to be heterozygous and not homozygous dominant. So then what about the two children, the other two children? So we know that they have black hair, that's the phenotype, but what would their genotypes be? So based on the genotypes of the father and the mother, the only possible genotypes these individuals can be would also be heterozygous. So both children there that are black haired have to be heterozygous. So this is basically saying that each of these children would have obtained an allele from the father and the mother. So the dominant allele comes from the mother and the recessive allele would have come from the father. So that would be the case in both the black-haired daughter and the black-haired son. So now let's go to the last part of the pedigree chart. So we're looking at this family, this part of the family over here. So we still have to work out what this female is. So this is the female that would have married into this family. So she would have married or reproduced with this son here. And they produce 3 children. So we have 1 brown-haired girl and 2 black-haired boys. So is this mother heterozygous or is she homozygous dominant? So if his mother was homozygous dominant and she mated with the heterozygous father, all of her children should have black hair. So some children might be heterozygous or some might be homozygous dominant. But clearly there is a brown-haired child, so that cannot be a possibility. So therefore the mother would have to be heterozygous in order to produce a child that has brown hair. So with both parents being heterozygous, we see how this individual, this brown-haired child, this brown-haired girl, would have obtained a recessive allele from each parent. So 1 from the father and 1 from the mother. Now what about the 2 black-haired children, the 2 black-haired boys? Is it possible for them to be either homozygous dominant or heterozygous? So it can actually be either or. So these two boys can either be homozygous dominant or heterozygous. So that pretty much completes the analysis and working out this pedigree chart for hair color. So it's all about using the information that is provided and being able to predict the genotypes of the individuals in the pedigree chart. So the parents, and then we see the first generation of offspring, and then the second generation of the offspring. So that pedigree chart is completed. So all the genotypes have been predicted. Alright, let's look at another example. Okay, in this second example, we are looking at a pedigree chart for eye color. So we have brown eyes versus blue eyes. So we're seeing that this is a particular trait that we're looking at. So eye color. So brown eyes. So based on the key here, the brown eyes are represented by the unshaded squares and circles, and blue eyes are represented by the shaded squares and circles. And then it says at the bottom that brown eyes are dominant over blue eyes. So that is some important information there. So there are going to be more brown-eyed individuals in the family compared to blue-eyed individuals. So once again, we're going to have the letters B. The letter B representing the alleles. So capital B. So you can choose any letter you want to. I just decided to use B again. So we're going to have capital B representing the dominant allele for brown eyes. So based on the information given just now, brown eyes is dominant. And then the common letter B would be the recessive allele for blue eyes. So one of the first things you need to understand is, in order for the individual to have the recessive trait, which is clearly the blue eyes, remember they have to be homozygous recessive. So they have to inherit 2 recessive alleles from the parents. So So every blue-eyed individual shown in this pedigree chart should have the homozygous recessive genotype. So usually that is the best way to start. The easiest way to start is to get rid of those individuals that are carrying the recessive trait. So we know brown eyes is dominant. So every individual that has blue eyes, so those are the shaded circles and squares, every individual with blue eyes should be homozygous recessive. So they should have 2 recessive alleles. So I've put in all the blue-eyed individuals, the genotypes for them. So that is 1, 4, 10, 13, and 16. So in this case, you're seeing that the individuals are numbered. Sometimes that can make it easy when you're working out these problems. So all the blue-eyed individuals are homozygous recessive. So that now leaves us to have to just work out the genotypes for the brown-eyed individuals. So remember, the brown-eyed individuals can either be heterozygous or they can be homozygous dominant. So let's break down this pedigree chart. Sometimes it's easy to just break down the different parts of the chart. So let's look at this first family here. So we're looking at 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So we're seeing this blue-eyed father mating with the brown-eyed mother, and 4 children are produced. So 5, 6, 7, 8 are their children, and all of the children have brown eyes. So these brown-eyed children, they had to have inherited the dominant allele from the mother. Remember, the brown eyes are dominant. So is it possible for this mother to be homozygous dominant, or is she heterozygous? So in order for all of these children, not one of the children have blue eyes, it would make sense for this mother to be homozygous dominant, since all of her children are brown eyes, have brown eyes. So number 2, the mother would have to be homozygous dominant. So that pretty much means that all of the children, therefore, would have to be heterozygous. So each of these children, 5, 6, 7, and 8, would have inherited the recessive allele from the father and the dominant allele from the mother. So all of them would be heterozygous for brown eyes. So all 4 children are heterozygous. So we are covered with that part of the family. Now let's go over to the second part of the pedigree chart, the second family over here. So we're seeing that 3 and 4, they're mating. We already have the genotype for 4. So the mother is blue-eyed in this case. The father has brown eyes. Now if we look at their 4 children, so once again we have these parents producing 4 children. So their children are 9, 10, 11, and 12. So out of the 4 children, there's 1 blue-eyed child. So this daughter has blue eyes, while the other children have brown eyes. So therefore we can deduce that we can confirm that in order for this child to be blue-eyed, the father has to be heterozygous. There's no other way it could be. It cannot be homozygous dominant, because then we're going to end up with the same situation as over here, with all the children having brown eyes, all of them being heterozygous. But that cannot be the case, because clearly there is a blue-eyed child, so she would have had to inherited the recessive allele from both parents. So we know for sure that the father has to be carrying the recessive allele. So he has brown eyes, therefore he has the dominant allele for brown eyes, but he's also going to have the recessive allele for blue eyes. So the father has to be heterozygous rather than homozygous dominant. So with the father being heterozygous for brown eyes, and the mother obviously homozygous recessive because she has the blue eyes. Now the 3 remaining children that we haven't worked out the genotype for as yet, they could only be heterozygous like the father. there's no way that any of these children can be homozygous dominant. In order for these children to be homozygous dominant for brown eyes, both parents would have to be carrying the dominant allele. So that leaves 9, 11, and 12. They have brown eyes, and they're going to have the same genotype as the father. So they will be heterozygous like the father for brown eyes. So we now have that family completed in terms of working out the genotypes. So now going on to the last family. So we still have 14 and 15 to work out. So we have the genotypes for 8 and 9. So we have two brown-eyed parents. So the mother has brown eyes, the father has brown eyes, and both of them are heterozygous for brown eyes. Now if you look at the children, so once again 4 children are produced, and 2 of the children in this case now have blue eyes. So 13 and 16 have blue eyes, while the other 2 children, 14 and 15, have brown eyes like the parents. So in this case, based on the genotypes of the parents, these brown-eyed children can be either homozygous dominant or heterozygous, because in terms of being homozygous dominant, a child could have inherited both dominant alleles from the parents. So one could have been inherited from the mother and one could have been inherited from the father. So that would make one child possibly being homozygous dominant, while the other child can be similar to the parent's genotype, heterozygous. So it can be either or for 14 and 15. So that completes this pedigree chart for eye color. So you can see clearly with pedigree charts, you have to really analyze and examine the genotypes of the individuals. So you may need to look at the genotypes of the parents, obviously, to determine the genotypes of the children, and then in some cases you have to examine the children's genotypes, their phenotypes especially, to work out the genotypes of the parents. So it can go either way. So you really have to study the chart, the information that is given. So you're using the information about the phenotypes to work out the genotypes of the individuals. So hopefully you have a better understanding of working out pedigree charts. So to see if you really understand pedigree charts, I have an exam question here I'd like you to work on. So it says the genetic disorder cystic fibrosis CF is caused by a recessive allele C. The family tree in figure 6 shows the incidence of the disease over 3 generations. So the question says, explain why the grandparents are most likely heterozygous. So question 1 asks about that, why the grandparents are most likely heterozygous, and then 2, suggest the genotype of both Sumintra and her husband. Give reasons for your answer. So comment your answers below. Alright, let's look at another exam question, question 2. So it says figure 6 shows the inheritance of earlobe size in a human family. So using the chart in figure 6 above, state the genotypes of family members 1, 2, and 6. So I also like you to work this out and comment your answers below. So in part 6 of Genetics 101, I'll be looking at the different types of variation. So we'll look at the difference between discontinuous and continuous variation, as well as genetic variation and environmental variation. So stay tuned for that. If you found this video helpful, feel free to subscribe, like, and share. And don't forget to hit that notification bell.